Redditors with real life butterfly effect stories. What happened and what was the series of events and outcomes? 5th or 6th grade. I tried to confess to my crush by gifting him a strawberry muffin. I left it in his desk and my plan was to confess I was the one giving the muffin. He ended up having an allergic reaction that caused him to be taken by an ambulance. This caused me to never confess. Fast forward to junior year. We were starting to study the basis of a research project to help with our thesis the following year. His original project partner ended up moving to another part of the country and had to switch schools. So he joined my group. At this point I was over the crush, but it was nice having him as a friend. Then one day that we were working on the project, I don't remember exactly how, but we brought out the topic that we should share a secret with each other to become closer friends. I told him about the muffin and he came out of the closets to me. A couple of weeks later he did it at the school. This caused us to become basically joined by the hip, and he introduced me to his family, and still unknown to me, introduced me to my future BF, his older brother. We have been dating for over 2 years now. In November of 2018, there was a huge blizzard right around Thanksgiving. My college didn't close for the blizzard, so I went out early to get some hash browns from the dining hall before my psychology exam. I ended up falling and getting a really bad concussion and had to reschedule my midterm. The day after, or maybe 2 days after, I ended up taking a triple dose of my panic attack medication because benzos and concussions make you really confused. I knew something was wrong, so I went to the ER and nobody believed me that the overdose was by accident. So at the psychiatric inpatient, I was prescribed some antidepressants. Nurse reassured me that the good mood was just not being depressed. Instead I was actually manically happy and high. Got serotonin syndrome, muscle spasms, muscle atrophy, seizures, fever that didn't go down with Tylenol, so had to use an ice bath, coma for a bit, quit college because I couldn't even feel hunger, went home, did physical therapy, and got antidepressants because serotonin syndrome ruined my ability to make serotonin. Took a DNA test and found out I metabolize SSRIs at double the pace. In the meantime, got to meet tons of nurses and doctors and discovered I wanted to be a nurse. Started volunteering EMT and even got to deliver a baby. Got a full ride to college for nursing too. So wanting blizzard class plus hash browns equals concussion more than overdose more than inpatient more than serotonin syndrome more than quitting college for multiple treatments more than finding my true passion, going back to school, and delivered a baby. After high school, I attended a community college for a few years. I'm rather introverted and I'm not good at making new friends. So for most of my first term I basically didn't interact with anyone. I had a 2-hour break between 2 of my classes. So I started hanging out in the cafeteria because it had chairs and food. One day I saw a guy rocking a blue fedora. This was before the fedora wearing neckbud stereotype really became a thing. And also this particular guy is not and never has been a neckbud in any way, and I complimented him on it. We chatted a little bit and he invited me to join him and his friends who also spent their free time hanging out in the cafeteria. Fedora guy and I dated for a little while, but ultimately we weren't a good fit long term, though we have remained good friends. The big thing, though, was that he introduced me to an internet discussion forum he was part of. I joined that forum and became a very active member in that community, and made a lot of friends through there. Several years later, I was feeling pretty trapped in where I was in life, working a retail job and barely making ends meet, with no resources to go back to school and no marketable skills to look for other work. A couple from the forums, who lived a good 600 miles from me, offered to let me move in with them and they'd support me while I essentially tried to restart my life. I took them up on their offer, moved from Oregon to California, met a guy I really hit it off with, and am now married and working a job that gives me a great deal of satisfaction. All because I said, dude, I like your hat to a stranger in the cafeteria 15 years ago. About 20 years ago I was watching a TV show about a guy in Australia who feeds the homeless. At the end they interviewed a few of the homeless who all said he was great, and their names flashed up on the bottom of the screen. One of the guys had the same name as my brother, who I hadn't seen for about 15 years. I looked at the screen, squinted, and there under the dirt and grime was my brother, who was an addict and lost touch with us years ago. I called the TV program and got the name of the feeder guy. He contacted my brother and passed on my phone number. A couple of days later I got a call and told him he could come live with me. And he did. He moved in at my place. Then the next morning went up the road to get a newspaper to look for a job. This was about 2000. Came back and he'd found someone advertising for English teachers in China. He asked me what I thought. I said, "What have you got to lose?" So off he went. And loved it. Kept telling me to go too. So 6 months later I quit my job. Sold my car. Moved everything I wanted to keep over to my older brother's place. And left for China. I was there for 18 years. I met a girl. Got married. Bought an apartment. Had 2 kids. Then the Hong Kong troubles came and I moved back to Australia a few months ago. And it all started from watching a TV show and seeing a name I knew. I was invited to hang out with an acquaintance who I barely knew freshman year of high school. I wasn't sure if I should go but decided to try it out. We had so much fun, she became my best friend and it led to a regular meetups and we both started bringing in more friends and just got bigger every month with almost 30 people who got together every weekend by senior year. Many of us are still good friends and our lives, spouses, and careers have all been shaped by this group that I honestly don't think would have formed if I hadn't been invited that night freshman year. I was supposed to go to a U2 concert with this girl was friends with, her boyfriend, and a couple other people. I had a knack for getting good seats at shows so it was up to me to get tickets. She went nuts and accused me of trying to break into her house to clean her carpets while she was in Croatia, so I kept the tickets. They hadn't paid me yet. Because I still wanted to go but not with them because they were really good seats. I went to a street fair in town a couple of weeks later and ran into a girl I was friends with from high school who loved U2. I sold her a ticket and she asked if she could bring a friend, which just made me think, woohoo, I'm selling another one of these really pricey tickets. The girls show up at my place day of show and her friend smiles as she is walking in. I saw the smile and knew that was it. I'm going to be spending the rest of my life chasing that smile. Well over 20 years. A couple of kids and dogs later. And as soon as I finish typing this I'm headed to bed to snuggle up next to her. TL. Doctor, I met my wife because one of my friends went nuts and accused me of trying to clean her carpets while she was in Croatia. It all started with the first week of my college freshman year. It goes. I drunkenly wandered into a frat party one night and thought, oh duck, they have a fire pit. That's cool. I joined that fraternity, drank a lot of beer, got the freshman 15, and looked like it. My roommate suggested that I start boxing with him to get in better shape and to get girls. Hint, got 0. A year later I had my first sanctioned amateur boxing bout. 2 years later I won an amateur US national championship. Thanks to that, I became the captain of my college boxing team and dipped into coaching new people. Realized I really ducking liked coaching and teaching people new things. Decided to try becoming a teacher and get my master's in education. Applied with a 2.7 GPA lol. Holy it, I'm a ducking teacher now. Can't imagine a more fun and fulfilling job. All of this because I was really drunk and liked that one frat house with a fire pit. So yeah, moral of that story, I have a fire pit in my backyard now. Your entire life is kind of one big butterfly effect really. Turned 16. Had like 3k saved up and my parents let me pick dinner one night. Picked a local Italian place that has an empty lot next door that always has used cars parked there. That night I found a cool car that I ended up buying. That got me online to learn more about that car, which turned me into a car guy, which kept me working more hours to fund said car, which kept me away from some potential problematic friends who were into drugs and alcohol. So cars more than loser friends. World War II. Some guys are looking for volunteers to go join a group that goes behind enemy lines. No one volunteers. They randomly select my grandfather. Everyone that didn't join that group in that camp was killed on front lines. Boyfriend broke up with me soon after I got the opportunity to work abroad. I wouldn't have taken said job if the relationship would have continued, but because I was afraid to run into him constantly, I decided to go away. Met a very nice coworker, also foreigner. He turned out to be the love of my life. Now I'm living in his country. Been married a couple of years and we're expecting our first baby. My husband and I are from different continents. He's my one and only. I never would have found him if that dumb boyfriend wouldn't have broken up with me. I thank that ex so much. Not me, but one of my flight instructors. He was supposed to fly Senator Hines but was unavailable. That particular flight, while trying to determine if the nose gear was down properly, had a mid-air collision with a helicopter where everyone died. If my instructor had taken the flight, he was very experienced, as he was supposed to, and managed to land safely. Senator Hines probably would have beat out G.W. Bush for the Republican nomination and therefore the presidency. As Hines was a moderate, the second Iraq War might not have happened. Edit. Thank you for the silver, kind stranger. Sorry about this sad story, but here it goes. When I was about 5, our family was planning to go to our village to celebrate festive season. Dad was a doctor and he thought it would be cool to buy a new car before going. He called his friend's dealership and they sent 3 cars for viewing. We ended up liking one car and we kept that, but my silly sister left her favorite shoes in the car and kept crying over it. She was like 2. Next morning, Dad said that why don't you guys take the new car with the driver and leave and I will swing by the dealership, pick up shoes, drop off old car and get there by train. Mom reluctantly agreed and our driver took us to our village. Dad decided to leave next day, but that night fighting broke out between 2 rival groups and few people were shot. Dad had to operate on those all night, saving lives. Next morning, being too tired, he decided to skip going to dealership and join us directly. The family of the gunshot victim, being grateful, offered to drive my dad in his old car to our village. The driver was idiot or tired or whatever. He drove the car into a ditch, causing injuries to him and Dad. Injuries weren't bad, but it led to my dad having a heart attack and passed away 10 days after. Don't leave your shoes in the car, kids. When I was 6, I was riding my bike and a bee was chasing me. I ended up ditching my bike in the middle of the road in front of a random house. A guy came out and helped me by swatting the bee away and getting me back on my bike. His daughter came out to observe and we introduced ourselves and became good friends. When I was 8, I moved away and only saw her one other time over the next 10 years. When I turned 18, I got my driver's license and decided I was going to see if she still lived in the same house. Drove an hour and it turns out she did still live there. For those of you thinking that we got married and lived happily ever after, nope. We did end up hitting it off and I was head over heels in love with her. She moved 3 hours away to Chicago for college. So I applied to college in Chicago and moved with her. Spent 1 semester there before I ran out of money. Ended up joining the Navy to support us. But once I got out of boot camp, she decided that she wanted to stay in Chicago, and a month later it was too difficult for us to have a long distance relationship. Fast forward 6 years. I get stationed in Washington State. Meet the girl of my dreams. Actually understand what it means to fall head over heels in love with somebody. Married for going on 9 years now. 2 kids. Awesome life. I never would have met my wife if I didn't join the Navy. I never would have joined the Navy if I didn't move to Chicago and go broke. Never would have went to Chicago if it wasn't for the girl. Never would have met that girl if it wasn't for the bee that chased me off my bike. I duckin' love bees. This woman I know was living with some guy, and one night, years ago, they were watching a local public access TV show on cable. She said to her squeeze, "This is so itty, we could do better." She had a video background. So they did. They ran it, a weekly show for years with a volunteer crew, with the woman as producer. Relationships were formed among the volunteers. At least 1 child was born and a couple of marriages. One of them was mine. I came on as a volunteer toward the end, and ended up marrying the woman who was producing. The show was science fiction fan based, and a bunch of them got together to found a convention for SF fanzine publishers. 35 years later, it's still sustaining itself as a con, moving from city to city every year. All because my wife saw bad public access TV show and made a decision. Not sure a lot of these stories qualify, including this one, but seems to be a theme of how things work out by accident or incident. Had bottomed out in LA and decided to go to Asia to get my TEFL. Had completed the certification and was beginning the job search for a teacher gig. Was looking for a new apartment when I hear a guy playing guitar in his room. The door was open and I tell him he sounds good. He asks if I play. I do, and offers me a go. Then says I should come audition at the bar he works for the next day. I couldn't get sneezed on as a muso in LA, but I'm like sure, it'll be fun just to plug in and jam with some cats for a minute. Turns out they offered me a house gig playing nights, as well as doing their creative work during the day. Best job I ever had, mostly thanks to being open. This girl that I had a crush on posted in a Facebook group for buy-sell trade in a small college community about looking for a boyfriend. It was deleted in less than 5 minutes by the admins for being against the rules. I saw her post in those 5 minutes. I messaged her. We started dating. Fell in love immediately. We moved across the country together. Over 6 years later I'm still living in the state we moved to together, even though we broke up a year after arriving. I think there's a good chance I'll spend the rest of my life here, but that's not all. Because of her I got connected to another Facebook group for drug reform jobs. Through that group I found my first job in cannabis, something that's led directly to my next 3 jobs, including my current job, and maybe my entire career. Not my story but my parents. My dad left the RAF in 1953 and began working in a local factory. He'd been working there for roughly 6 months when his dad passed away. My dad was distraught and struggled to cope with his grief, particularly as his own dad was reasonably young when he died. He ultimately decided that a combination of grief and a growing sense of alienation outside of the RAF was too much and decided to re-enlist. A few days before he was due to formalize his re-entry, he was approached by a colleague at work who told him that one of the girls liked him and would like to go on a date. My dad was fairly introverted at this stage, and although he agreed to go on the date, he never showed up, partly because he suspected people were setting him up. The day after, his colleague asks him where he was, as the girl waited for him for a while and was a little upset when he was a no-show. My dad was a little nonplussed by this, and couldn't believe it had actually been a genuine thing. He asked if he could have a second chance, and she agreed to it. On the night of the date he arrived, trying to act as cool as possible, but as soon as he saw her, he knew he wouldn't be acting cool. He fell for her straight away, and after he dropped her off at home, said he floated home. They were married a year later, had 4 children, 13 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren. They both passed away in 2017, within 6 months of each other. 63 years of marriage and a large, loving family. I realize this may not fit the description of a butterfly effect, but to us it is, and we are always thankful for it. I saw a cool witchcraft shop across the road from a gaming shop I went to semi-regularly. Convinced BF to come with me. Owner is nice, we get on well. Turns out he loved tin soldiers etc when he was a kid and is thinking about starting a new business. I introduce him to the guy who runs the gaming shop. 3 months later the gaming store closes due to sky-high rents. Wizard and the game store manager come up with a plan for an amazing game store with all kinds of tabletop and war games. 3 months later they hold an event to advertise and scope out customer base. BF and I go and help organize, meeting people and making friends. 1 year later the new store opens and it's awesome. I become a regular, have a best friend and many other friends. Place becomes like a second home. 3 years pass. BF and I realize we don't want the same things in life. We break up but are now besties. Later I realize that I am in love with best friend from game store. I confess. He feels the same. Turns out we fell for each other and were both too scared to say anything while I was still in a relationship. We date. 4 months later he proposes and it feels right so I say yes. Everyone including ex-BF are thrilled for us. And that's how I helped start the biggest gaming store in the southern hemisphere and met the love of my life by walking into a witchcraft shop. My best friend and I were going to get breakfast and then ride to an event together one morning. She was running late, so we decided to meet at the diner and drive separately instead of meeting at my house and leaving her car there. After breakfast, I got in a wreck and the seat where she would have been sitting if she had ridden with me was totally smashed. She would have died if she had been on time for breakfast. That same wreck caused me to miss an important deadline. I was planning to move out of state, but was injured in the accident and ended up staying put for several more months to recover. While I was recovering, I started dating a guy. If I'd moved as I had planned to before the accident, we might never have started dating. He ended up being really bad for me. But when we broke up, my rebound guy ended up being a real winner. We've been married for 13 years and have 2 amazing children. I went to Amsterdam to meet up with friends. On the way back there was a train at the station, but the display didn't show information. I decided to ask a random guy who was entering the train if this was the right one. It was, and we start chatting. Holy it, this guy is a perfect match for my mom. I asked him he would like to date her. He agreed. Because of the unique condition, they had a relationship within a month, lived together within a year, 11 years later still together, married for 4 years, all because of a broken display. I was a failing student and my family lost hope that I'll ever become anything, all except my older brother who had the patience to teach me mathematics. That led to me wanting to do well in one of my first external exams, in which I scored the highest out of all my school. This year I graduated with a medical science PhD, all because my brother never gave up on me. It's super weird to think about things like that. For me, my sister introduced me to a game as a kid more than I searched the game on Google years later, more than vaguely related Google image introduced me to a different game more than I joined a forum for that game, more than the people there introduced me to Tumblr, more than I met my ex on Tumblr, more than my ex introduced me to Twitter, more than I later joined a huge friend group on Twitter. Years later a horrific tragedy happened in my life and I became homeless. Some people in that friend group gave me temporary shelter and without them I would have literally died. If even one step of that hadn't played out the way it did, I would straight up be dead. A Google image search in 2009 saved my life, in some sense, in 2014. Wild. In Australia the schooling system is split into 3 parts. Primary school ages 6-12, kindergarten, year 6, high school ages 13-18, year 7, year 12, higher education 16+. Anyways, at the end of primary school, 12 years old, me and some of my female friends decided to run away from the guys because they had cooties that escalated into a game of tag. We then started letting other kids from 11 years old to 12 years old join us until eventually every kid in year 5 and 6 were playing tag. We would meet at the cricket net and the last 3 that would meet there would be it. That lasted until year 6 graduated. Many of the children there never talked to each other, yet I know many of them that are now close friends, and 2 kids that hated each other that are getting married. At university we took an exam in a large gym hall. It was so cold you could see your breath in there. Enough students complained that the university agreed to give everyone an extra 5%. That 5% was the difference between a pass-fail for me. Not just that exam, but the entire year. If it wasn't cold that day, I would have to have either retaken the year or drop out of uni, completely altering the course of my life. I unfollowed someone on Twitter. I did this because my phone was having an issue where I received a notification for every single tweet, and I couldn't turn them off. One guy, in particular, tweeted constantly, so I unfollowed him until I could figure my phone out. He was a YouTuber whose channel had been losing traction. When he noticed I unfollowed him, he recognized me as someone who followed him for a long time and it made him sad. He decided to message me to ask what he could improve with his content and to say sorry to see me go. I explained myself and we keep talking and talking and talking. I had been in a very bad place in my life. I worked from home and totally isolated myself. I never talked to people. I was on the verge of a very dark place, but I just couldn't stop talking to this guy. After coming to visit, continuing to talk every day, moving in and becoming my roommate, we are now happily in love and are even now trying to start a family. A day hasn't gone by where we haven't loved talking to each other. I'm so glad I unfollowed him. When I was 19 I was working a IT retail job and had an awful store manager that was a really nasty guy. One day I snapped and had enough and stormed out. I never came back. I felt guilty as the store manager only scheduled 2 people on at the end of the day. So with me gone it was just him and my colleague who was about to leave for the day. On his last ever day, the colleague stayed on an extra hour or 2 on his last day to cover for me, and I guess because I left abruptly, agreed to work a few extra shifts until I was replaced. My replacement was a woman whom later became his wife and now they have 2 children. If I hadn't rage quit that day, the likelihood is they never would have met and those kids would never exist.